Margaret sat alone in her small, cozy house on the edge of a quiet suburban town in Oregon. The rain had been falling since morning, a steady drizzle tapping against the window panes like an old melody. The house felt still, almost too still. It's a kind of silence that made her long for the days when laughter used to fill every corner. She missed those days, the sound of her late husband reading the newspaper, her daughter Linda rushing to school, and the soft giggles of her grandson Jake as a child. Now the rooms felt hollow, echoing only the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Her routine rarely changed. She'd wake up, make her tea, feed the birds outside, and spend the afternoon knitting or watching the neighborhood children ride their bikes past her garden fence. But that particular morning, the phone rang, a sound that startled her more than it should have. She picked it up, and hearing her daughter's voice made her heart flutter. "Mom, you'll never guess. Jake's driving through town today. He wants to stop by and see you," Linda said, excitement clear in her tone. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she held the phone. "Jake, really? Oh, it's been so long," she said softly, already glancing toward the living room as if preparing it in her mind. "He said he misses you. He should be there this afternoon." Linda continued before hanging up. Margaret stood in her kitchen for a moment, stunned but smiling. Jake, her grandson, the boy who used to chase butterflies in her backyard and steal cookies cooling on the counter, was coming home, even if just for a visit. The thought filled her chest with warmth she hadn't felt in months. She moved through the house with a lightness that surprised her. She changed the flowers in the vase, set the old family photo frame upright, and even took out her best teacups. Hours passed slowly, each minute pulling her anticipation tighter. She caught herself glancing at the clock too often. By the time she heard the sound of tires crunching on the gravel outside, her heart was racing like a young girl's. She walked to the door, smoothing her sweater, and when she opened it, there he was. Jake stood in the doorway, taller than she remembered, his features sharper, more grown-up. His hair was darker now, slightly wet from the rain, and he carried the calm confidence of someone who'd seen a bit of life. But his eyes, those soft, gray-blue eyes, still held the same warmth. "Grandma," he said with that same boyish grin that melted her heart every time. He stepped forward, wrapping her in a hug that was both familiar and new. "My goodness, look at you," she said, touching his face as if she couldn't quite believe it. "You've grown so much." Jake laughed. "It's been a while, huh? I missed you." She led him inside her home, suddenly feeling alive again. The air seemed lighter, warmer. Jake dropped his bag by the door and followed her to the kitchen. The smell of her chicken stew filled the room, and his eyes lit up. "You made my favorite. I never forgot," she said proudly, stirring the pot as they sat down at the table. The conversation flowed easily at first, stories of school, work, and the city. Jake told her about his new job, how fast-paced it was, how he felt like the days just blurred together. Margaret listened carefully, smiling, nodding, though she sensed a faint exhaustion behind his words. After lunch, Jake offered to help her with chores. Together, they moved boxes in the garage and dusted old shelves, laughing as they uncovered pieces of the past: an old baseball glove, a faded photo album, his grandfather's hat. Margaret felt time folding back, moments from years ago returning in flashes. She could still see little Jake, 7 years old, running through that same garage with a wooden sword in his hand. Pretending to be a knight, when they finished, she brewed a pot of tea, and they sat by the window watching the rain taper off. "You know," Jake said after a while, his voice quieter now, "I missed this. Just sitting here. Everything in the city feels loud, rushed, but this house, it's peaceful." Margaret smiled, a trace of pride in her eyes. "It's just an old house, dear. But peace comes from who's sitting in it." Jake looked at her thoughtfully, as if her words carried more weight than she realized. The clock ticked between their silences. She noticed him staring at his cup, lost in thought. His face had that look people get when they're holding something heavy inside, but don't know how to speak it aloud. "Something on your mind?" she asked gently. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "You always notice, don't you?" "I've had years of practice," she replied. "You can tell me anything, Jake. Always. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed, leaning back on the couch. I don't even know where to start. Start wherever it feels right, she said softly. Jake stared at the carpet for a long second. Then whispered, I've been ... Struggling, Grandma? Margaret's heart tensed, but she didn't interrupt. She knew this tone, the one people used when their hearts were tired. Go on, sweetheart, she encouraged. I thought growing up would feel different. I thought once I had a good job, an apartment, everything would make sense. But it doesn't. It feels like I'm living on autopilot. Everyone thinks I'm doing fine, Mom, Dad, but inside, I feel ... empty. Like I'm pretending all the time. His voice cracked slightly. And that small sound broke her heart more than any words could. She reached out, taking his hand. Oh, Jake, she whispered. He gave a shaky laugh. I didn't mean to dump all that on you. I didn't know who else to talk to. You don't have to apologize, she said firmly. You came to the right place. I'm glad you told me. He looked up, surprised by how steady her voice was. Really? She nodded. You've never let me down, Jake. You don't have to be perfect. None of us do. Something softened in his face. The tension in his shoulders eased, and for the first time in a long while, he looked like the little boy she remembered, open, vulnerable, human. The room fell into a peaceful silence. The rain had stopped completely now, and faint sunlight peeked through the gray clouds. Margaret squeezed his hand gently, letting her warmth speak what words couldn't. After a while, Jake spoke again. You know, Grandma, you're the only person I can talk to like this. You don't judge, you just listen. She smiled, her eyes moist. That's what love does, Jake. It listens when no one else will. The air between them felt full, heavy with emotion yet comforting. There was no need for more words. Everything important had already been said in the quiet. Understanding between them. When Jake finally rose to leave, the evening light stretched across the living room, painting everything in gold. Margaret walked him to the door, her heart full but aching. He hugged her tightly before stepping outside. You don't know how much this means to me, he whispered. I think I needed this more than anything. Then come back soon, she said softly. This house and I will always be here. He smiled, that same warm smile that had lit up her world since the day he was born. I will, Grandma. I promise. As he drove away, Margaret stood at the door, watching the fading glow of his car lights disappear down the road. The silence returned, but it felt different this time. Not empty, but peaceful. She turned off the lights, sat on the couch, and let the moment sink in. Something in her heart told her that visit wasn't just another family visit. Something had shifted, though she couldn't name it yet. It was as if the quiet bond between them had deepened, something fragile but strong. Something that had been waiting in the stillness of her lonely home to come alive again, for the first time in a long while. Margaret didn't feel alone. The house, though silent, carried a new kind of warmth, one born from love, honesty, and the simple power of being truly seen by someone you love. And as she drifted to sleep that night, she couldn't help but smile. Something had changed, not just in Jake, but in her too. And deep down, she knew the real story between them had only just begun. The next morning, Margaret woke to the soft hum of birds outside her window. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, painting faint golden lines on the wooden floor. She moved slowly, her body still adjusting to the quiet after Jake's visit. The house, which had felt alive yesterday, seemed still again, but not empty. There was something warm lingering in the air, a trace of comfort his presence had left behind. She made her tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Jake had sat just hours ago. His laughter still echoed faintly in her mind. She smiled, but the smile faded when her eyes fell on the folded note beside the sugar jar, Jake's handwriting. It simply said, "Thank you for listening. You always make things clearer." Margaret touched the paper gently, her heart swelling with pride and sadness all at once. She knew he was struggling, that beneath his confident exterior lay something fragile, something unsettled. She wished she could fix it all for him, the way she once could when he scraped his knees or cried after a bad dream. But this was different. This was life, and sometimes all one could do was listen. Later that day, as she was watering her garden, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake. "Grandma, can I come by again tonight? I need to talk." Her hands froze over the rose bush. Tonight, she thought? It hadn't even been 24 hours since he'd left. Something in her heart tightened, half with worry, half with anticipation. She quickly typed back, "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be waiting." Evening arrived sooner than expected. Margaret prepared dinner, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread, the kind of meal that always made Jake feel at home. When she heard the sound of a car in the driveway, she hurried to the door. Jake stepped out, looking tired, his shoulders slumped. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. Maybe even fear. "Come in, dear," she said softly. "You look like you've had a long day." He nodded without speaking, stepping inside. They sat at the table, and Margaret watched him quietly as he picked at his food, lost in thought. Finally, she asked, "Is everything all right?" Jake looked up, hesitated, then sighed. "I don't even know where to start, Grandma. It's like everything is falling apart at once." Margaret folded her hands. "Then start with one thing. Sometimes when you say it out loud, it doesn't feel so heavy." He exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck, and said, "It's my job. I thought I was doing well, working hard, staying late, doing everything they asked. But yesterday my manager pulled me aside and said I wasn't focused enough, that I looked distracted." Margaret frowned. "Distracted by what?" Jake laughed bitterly. "Life, I guess. I don't even know anymore. I work all the time, but I'm not happy. I have friends, but I still feel lonely. And when I look around, everyone else seems to know exactly who they are. Meanwhile, I'm just pretending." Margaret's eyes softened. "You're not pretending, Jake. You're searching. That's different." He looked at her, confused. "Searching for what?" She smiled faintly. "For meaning, for peace, for yourself. Everyone does it, some earlier, some later. The only difference is you're brave enough to admit it." Jake's eyes glistened, the tension in his face easing slightly. "You always make it sound so simple." "Life isn't simple," she replied, "but love, kindness, and truth. Those are uncleached. Those are the things that guide us when nothing else makes sense." He was silent for a long moment, then leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You know what's strange, Grandma? Every time I come here, I feel ... calm, like I can breathe again. It's like the noise in my head just stops." Margaret smiled gently. "That's what homes are meant to do, dear. Quiet the noise." He looked around the kitchen, taking in the small details, the soft ticking clock, the warm light, the smell of bread. "I think it's more than the house," he said finally. "It's you." His words hung in the air like a soft confession. Margaret's heart skipped, though not in the way one might expect. It wasn't romantic, it was deeper than that. A recognition of something pure and human. She reached across the table, touching his hand. "That's because love never leaves, Jake. It only changes form." He looked down at their hands, her wrinkled fingers over his strong young ones. "You always know what to say," he murmured. "Years of practice," she said with a tender smile. After dinner, they moved to the living room. The rain had started again, tapping lightly on the windows. Jake sat on the couch, staring into the dim light of the lamp. "You ever wish you could go back?" he asked suddenly. Margaret looked at him, curious. "To when?" "To before everything changed. Before people grew up, before things got so complicated." She thought about it for a long while before answering. "Sometimes," she said quietly. "But then I remember every moment, even the painful ones, brought me here. And here isn't so bad." Jake nodded slowly. "You always find peace in everything." "Not always," she admitted. "But I learned that peace doesn't come from what's happening around us. It comes from what's happening inside us." He smiled faintly, staring into the distance. "I don't know if I'll ever get there." "You will," she said firmly. "Just give yourself time." The clock ticked softly between them. Margaret studied his face. The same boy she once rocked to sleep now looked like a man burdened by life's weight. She wished she could protect him again. But all she could do now was be the quiet space he needed. After a while, Jake got up and went to the old piano by the window. It had been years since anyone had played it. "You still keep this thing tuned?" he asked, chuckled. "Your grandfather would never forgive me if I didn't." Jake smiled and pressed a key. The sound was soft but clear. Slowly he began to play a tune, one she recognized instantly. It was a song her husband used to hum while fixing things around the house. The melody filled the room, wrapping around them like a memory made of sound. Margaret felt her throat tighten. "You remembered that?" Jake looked over his shoulder, smiling faintly. "You used to sing it to me when I couldn't sleep." She nodded, her eyes glistening. "You were just a boy then. And now I'm a mess of a man," he said softly. She stood and walked to him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "No, Jake, you're just finding your way." He stopped playing and looked up at her. Their eyes met, hers full of wisdom and love, his full of confusion and longing. For a moment, no words were needed. The warmth between them wasn't just family love. It was something spiritual, something built from shared pain and gentle understanding. "Grandma," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper, "I don't know what I'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out," she replied softly. The rain outside grew heavier, and thunder rumbled in the distance. The lights flickered, then went out completely, leaving only the faint glow from the fireplace. Margaret lit a candle, the golden light dancing across Jake's face. He chuckled. "Guess we're stuck here for a while. Then we'll make the most of it," she said. Sitting beside him again, they talked for hours about her youth, his dreams, and the small things people forget to say when life gets too fast. The storm raged on, but inside that little house, it felt like time stood still as the night deepened. Ouch. Jake leaned back on the couch, eyes half closed. "You know what's strange?" he murmured. "I feel lighter, like something inside me finally let go." Margaret smiled. "That's because you shared it, dear. Burdens shrink when you let someone carry them with you." He looked at her with deep affection. "You really are my safe place, Grandma." Tears pricked her eyes, but she smiled through them. "And you, Jake, are my reminder that love never truly leaves. It just comes back in new forms." The candle flickered between them, their shadows dancing gently on the wall. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving the air calm and cool. Jake leaned back, exhaling deeply. "I think I'll stay the night if that's okay." Margaret nodded, her heart full. "Of course, dear. You're home." And as the storm finally quieted, both of them sat there, two souls from different generations, connected not by words but by something far more powerful, understanding. For the first time in a long while, Jake didn't feel lost. And for the first time in even longer, Margaret didn't feel alone. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was alive, soft, healing, and full of love. When Margaret woke the next morning, the house was filled with a strange, gentle stillness, the kind that comes after a storm. The air was cool, the windows fogged, and somewhere outside a bird was singing softly. For a few seconds, she forgot that Jake had stayed the night. Then she heard movement in the kitchen, the sound of a plate, a chair scraping the floor, and then laughter. Her lips curved into a smile before she even got out of bed. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and walked quietly to the kitchen. There he was, Jake standing by the stove, trying to flip pancakes with one hand while holding his phone in the other. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, mixing with the faint scent of rain that still lingered from the night before. "Good morning, dear," she said softly. Jake turned, surprised but smiling. "Morning, Grandma. I was trying to make breakfast before you woke up. I think I might have burnt a few." She chuckled, looking at the slightly uneven stack of pancakes. They looked just fine. The best meals are the ones made with love, not perfection. He laughed, setting the plate on the table. "Then this should be the best breakfast ever." They sat down together, sunlight slowly creeping through the window, falling across the old wooden table that had seen decades of family meals. Margaret watched Jake as he talked, his eyes brighter, his voice lighter than the night before. Something had shifted in him, something subtle but real. So she said, sipping her coffee, "You slept well?" He nodded. "Better than I have in weeks. It's like the house itself makes me rest." "That's what happens when you're surrounded by peace," she said gently. "The heart listens when the world quiets down." He smiled faintly, looking thoughtful. "You always say things like that. Do you ever get tired of being wise?" She laughed softly. "I wasn't wise when I was your age. I was impatient, scared, and unsure. Life taught me the rest." He leaned back in his chair, thinking, maybe I just haven't lived enough yet to understand all that. "You're living right now," she replied. "The lessons come whether we ask for them or not." The words hung between them, simple but heavy with meaning. Jake looked at her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You're right. I've been running so much, trying to fix everything, that I forgot to just ... be." Margaret reached out and squeezed his hand. "Sometimes the most important step forward is the one where you pause." He smiled, holding her hand for a second before letting go. "You make everything sound so easy." "It's not easy," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It's just simple. There's a difference." They finished breakfast, talking about small things, the flowers in the garden, the neighbors who always borrowed tools and forgot to return them, the old cat that sometimes wandered by. The morning was peaceful, but Margaret could sense something deeper stirring in Jake. He was quieter than usual, thoughtful, as if something still sat heavy on his heart, as she washed the dishes. He stood at the window watching the sunlight touch the wet leaves outside. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course, dear." He hesitated before speaking. "When Grandpa passed away, how did you handle it? I mean, really handle it?" Margaret paused, the question catching her off guard. She placed the dish down and turned to face him. "That was the hardest time of my life," she admitted. "At first I tried to stay busy, cleaning, gardening, doing anything to avoid thinking. But grief doesn't go away when you ignore it. It waits. It follows you until you sit down and face it." Jake nodded, his eyes distant. "Did it ever stop hurting?" She smiled sadly. "Not completely. But it changed. It became quieter, softer. The love stays, but the pain turns into something else. Something you carry, but it doesn't crush you anymore." Swallowed hard, looking down. "I think I understand that now." Her eyes softened. "Did you lose someone, Jake?" He shook his head slowly. "Not exactly. But I lost a part of myself. For so long, I thought I knew what I wanted, the job, the relationship, the perfect plan. Then everything just fell apart. I feel like I'm grieving something I can't even name." Margaret stepped closer and touched his arm. "That's because loss isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about change, about who we were before life tested us. And that kind of grief is just as real." He looked at her, eyes glistening. "I just want to feel like myself again." "You will," she said softly. "It takes time, but it will come. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about remembering differently." He took a deep breath, as if her words had lifted a weight he'd been carrying too long. "You always know what to say, Grandma. You make me believe things will be okay." She smiled. "That's because they will be." For a while, they stood there in silence, sunlight spilling into the room, washing over them both. Margaret felt a warmth in her chest, not just love for her grandson, but a deep gratitude for the moment itself. Life, she thought, had a strange way of circling back to peace. Later that afternoon, they went for a walk. The world smelled of rain and earth, and the streets were quiet. They didn't talk much, just walked side by side, letting the wind do the speaking. When they reached the old park bench where Margaret used to take Jake as a child, they sat down. "I used to come here after Grandpa passed," she said. "I'd sit here and talk to him, even though I knew he couldn't answer. It helped." Jake smiled softly. "I used to think you were talking to the wind." "I was," she said, laughing. "But sometimes the wind listens." He nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe that's what I need to do. Stop trying to fix everything and just listen. That's a good start, she said. They sat there for a long time, the sun dipping lower, the sky turning gold. Jake leaned back, watching the clouds drift. You know, Grandma, he said quietly, I think I'm starting to understand what peace feels like. Margaret smiled, her heart full. That's all I ever wanted for you. As the evening approached, they walked back to the house. The lights glowed warmly inside, welcoming them home. Jake helped her prepare dinner again, chopping vegetables, setting the table, moving with an ease that made her proud. You're a quick learner, she teased. He grinned. Maybe I just have a good teacher. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace. The world outside was quiet, and the only sound was the crackling of the flames. Jake turned to her and said, You know what I realized today? I keep waiting for life to make sense, but maybe it's not supposed to. Maybe it's just supposed to be lived one imperfect moment at a time. Margaret smiled, her eyes glistening. That's the secret, Jake. Once you stop fighting the mess, you start finding the beauty in it. He leaned back, a soft smile on his face. I think I'm ready to go back to work. Not because I have everything figured out, but because, I want to start again. She nodded proudly. That's all that matters. The courage to begin again. He looked at her, gratitude filling his expression. Thank you, Grandma, for listening, for understanding, for everything. She reached over and patted his cheek. You don't have to thank me, dear. You brought light back into this old house. As the fire flickered low, Jake stood and walked to the piano once more. This time, he played a tune that was different, softer, hopeful. Margaret closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. The room felt alive again, full of warmth, full of love. When the song ended, Jake turned to her. I think I'll visit more often. You better, she said with a smile. The house gets lonely without music. They both laughed. And in that sound, something beautiful was reborn. The bond between them, stronger and deeper than ever. That night, as Jake drove home under the starlit sky, he felt lighter than he had in years. He realized that peace wasn't found in perfection, but in connection, in the quiet moments shared with someone who truly cared. And back in the house, Margaret stood by the window, watching his car disappear down the road. Her heart was full, her eyes wet with quiet joy. She whispered into the still air, Thank you for coming back, Jake. Then she smiled because she knew some hearts are bound not by blood, but by the love they choose to keep alive.